In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Molly Bloom, former U.S. ski team hopeful turned poker entrepreneur, best-selling author, and the woman behind the Oscar-nominated film Molly's Game. Molly's story is one of reinvention. After a spinal surgery and a career-ending crash took her off the slopes, she landed in LA and eventually built the most exclusive high-stakes poker game in the world, hosting Hollywood celebrities, Wall Street titans, and billionaires, all while walking a razor-thin legal and moral line. Dan and Molly dive into her rise, her fall, and what it means to come back stronger, with purpose, values, and a clear sense of what really matters. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Molly, I've been so anxious to do this one. We've been talking about doing it for a little while now, and we finally got it scheduled. I think I had to cancel once, and you had to cancel once, but here we are. This is going to be a fun one.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this too. And, even though we live 5 minutes away, it's the schedules.
So you've been back now in Boulder for, 2 years, 2.5 years?
Yes.
So tell us about Boulder. What is special about Boulder to you personally?
I guess I had to leave Colorado. And my dad always said this. I had to leave Colorado and go out and live the big city life and, run around with big personalities. And then
kind of like right now.
Well, see that this is the sweet spot, right? We can be in nature with the bear, the big personality.
There you go.
Doesn't get bigger than that. But coming back here, I just feel like it's a dream.
Yep. Yet you are not the only Bloom here in Boulder. But I got to say, and I've joked with your brother about this a few times, the other Bloom isn't nearly as interesting, hasn't lived nearly as fun of a life. Yet let's just spend maybe a minute talking about the other Bloom, because I think it's important to know kind of the two of you, to some degree, kind of in totality, and then we'll go, into your story. So Jeremy, your brother, who's lived in Boulder for how long since he's come back to Boulder? It's been some time now, right?
I think he came back a year or two before I did.
And so we'll do like a series of one-word answer questions. Your brother was a skier.
Jeremy was an Olympic skier.
Olympic skier.
Three-time world champ.
Was
number one in the world at 16.
Holy cow. What else?
After the Turin Olympics, went to the NFL Combine, drafted 5th round of the Philadelphia Eagles. Mm-hmm. He was an Abercrombie model.
CU Boulder, rock star.
The first time he touched the ball, true freshman, ran it back for 70 yards. Loves Boulder, loves the Buffs, but had to ultimately step away. Mm-hmm. And that's a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Because of the old NCAA rules. And then, we thought he was just a kid that could run really fast. And then he started and sold a software company at the most perfect valuation time. I think like the next day was when it crashed. And now he's the CEO of the X Games.
Yes. And despite all that, he's not the most accomplished person in his family.
Oh, I hope you're not suggesting that I am, because our middle brother has us both whipped.
Wait, tell us about your middle brother. This I don't know about.
He's the best of us. So Jordan is a Harvard-educated cardiothoracic surgeon at Massachusetts General, and he studied under this really prolific surgeon and learned this very rare Ross procedure, which basically gives people who have faulty valves normal life expectancy. Whereas if you use a stent, you're gonna, that's not always the case. And he is also the nicest. And he will come home from, operating 12 hours, and he'll make dinner for his wife and kids.
Wow. So what was it like growing up in this Bloom family of all of these, children who've accomplished so much in life across such a wide spectrum as well?
Dan,
what were those ingredients?
It was a nightmare. I'm just kidding. It was hard because Jordan and Jeremy were just so good at the things that they did that that presented so early on. And I was more of the scrappy one. I really loved skiing and I wanted to do big things. But then I had a pretty serious spinal reconstruction surgery at 12, where they essentially put metal and fusions throughout my entire thoracic spine.
And that was, what caused that to happen?
Scoliosis.
Okay.
And so, I remember asking the doctors, like, when can I get back on the mountain? They essentially said, you can't. And I did. And then I worked really hard and, in certainly in the shadow of a child prodigy, who was my brother, who I was, of course, simultaneously proud of. And, that was the marker. But I ended up making the U.S. development ski team when I was 19. And then when I was 20, Jeremy and I both got third overall on the tour. And then at 21, my scores were high enough to qualify me for an Olympic qualifier, which I felt at that. And so that was the end of my ski career. But, and then, Jordan was just beating my parents in chess at a young age. He was like in my math class. And I had more figured out a way to work around some of what I felt were limitations in terms of like just hard, fast book smarts. So in any other family, I probably would have been, the one. But in mine, it was like, she's,
Where did you guys grow up?
We grew up in Loveland. So kind of, the flatlands.
Just about, 35 minutes straight north of where we're sitting right now, right?
Yeah. And it was very small town mentality. We lived out kind of in the country, which was an amazing childhood. Yeah. To be outside all the time. We had all these motorized vehicles that we consistently injured ourselves on. But, water ski during the summer, snow ski during the winter.
And what your parents, your dad and mom, what did they do in order to kind of create this environment that allowed all three of you to excel in very different ways?
I've been asked this question a lot, and I've done a lot of thinking about it, particularly because I have a 3-year-old. And I think my best guess is that we got sort of the best of both worlds. We got a father that was not going to accept failure, was not going to accept playing a victim. There's no bad weather, just bad clothes. It's 30 below zero, Dad. Nope. But and taught us this incredibly important skill of discipline, which he called constructive suffering. Which we know, if you want to do anything in the world, you got to learn to suffer constructively in the pursuit of of your dreams. And then also huge top on this list was he made us aware that fear doesn't need to be this thing that stops you.
And how would he make you aware of that? What would he do to?
Yeah, he would
say. Would that be in words, or would that be in actions, or how would that manifest itself?
Well, taking a couple toddlers out on double black diamonds gives you a good opportunity to teach that lesson.
Okay.
But just in general, it was, I remember him saying when we were growing up, there's two voices in your head. There's Chicken Little, afraid of everything, and then there's the big bad warrior, and who are you going to give oxygen to? Who are you going to feed? Who are you going to let win? And so that even became this competitive currency in my family. And a lot of those moments were hard. Like to have someone who just seems so performance-based all the time. And I don't want to say all the time. My dad was also very loving and funny, but you knew that you had to bring it in order for him to,
Yeah. And there's, not to turn this into a philosophical discussion, but there's probably a lot of wrong ways to parent, but there's no quote unquote right way to parent. Yeah. Because it has to be authentic. I think that maybe is a truism. Mm-hmm. But when I reflect on how I grew up, I didn't have that at all. I think until I was well in my 40s, my parents didn't even know what I did. They just knew I did something and made a really good living, and they were always curious, but didn't really have much context and didn't really seem to have a way of kind of relating to whatever life I was living. And certainly, as I was growing up, I didn't have any of that type of interaction with my parents. There was no overt coaching or kind of encouragement in a form beyond just, hey, go give it your best kind of thing. But none of the the kind of stuff you described, where your dad was engaged in a way where he was really helping to shape who each of you are in a much more active way. And it's interesting. I as you were talking about, to be honest with you, I felt a bit envious. Well, and hear you describe that. I'm sure it's like,
careful what you ask for.
Yeah.
No, I think it would have been actually maybe even a little harmful if we didn't have the polarity of my mom. So my mom was deep, unshakable, unconditional love. You can do anything you want in the world. It's okay. You don't need to, you don't need to do anything you don't need to win medals to make me happy. Mm-hmm. And also just a lot of making us aware of integrity and how we treat people, and the importance of these values. So I think it was the duality, because just one. So I was going to ask you. So because you didn't have that growing up, you probably, or did you form your sense of self from internal metrics as opposed to external metrics?
Certainly internal,
Mm-hmm.
but probably a sense of wanting to kind of shine to get an attention that may otherwise not have been there. Maybe that's the way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Kind of trying to prove something, I don't know, maybe to your family. Even though your family doesn't seem to, crave you to do that. It wasn't like they were expecting me to go do something. And
that's so interesting.
But I don't know. There's, as you get, I'm sure, a lot of questions about what drove you to do what you did. I get that question a lot as well. And I think the answer is always very complex for most individuals. It's just, it comes somewhere from within inside you. Maybe in some cases from good places, maybe more often from places that most people don't really want to kind of, acknowledge. But, you're trying to, the fear of failure, the fear of disappointment, the fear of not accomplishing whatever it is you think you need to accomplish is what I think drives a lot of people, even if it's really themselves they're trying to impress, not others.
It so rarely is.
Yeah.
Right. Stephen Bartlett, Diary of a CEO, asks a great question. Were you driven or were you dragged? So,
what were you?
I was both, I think, like you. I think I wouldn't have made the decisions and done the things in my life that I've done if it didn't come from somewhere deep within, mm-hmm. because there are so many moments where there's no world, right? Mm-hmm. It's just you, and are you gonna push yourself to this next limit or not? But then there's also the sort of similar to you. I wanted my dad to look at me in the same way that he looked at my brothers when, Andy Reid called and asked Jeremy if he wanted to play for the Eagles. My dad's from Philly, or, Jeremy goes to the Olympics, or Jordan gets into med school. And so, but I don't think I did much of developing an internal locus of control. I think for most of my life, probably until my mid to late 30s, I lived and died for the external validation. Hmm. I didn't want attention necessarily, but I didn't believe that I had inherent value unless I was doing something extraordinary, or, had a certain amount of money, or,
Yeah. And I don't think that's all bad. I mean, to desire to do something extraordinary, I think, is part of what makes
Absolutely.
people special.
For the first time, Dan Caruso pulls back the curtain in his book Bandwidth, a memoir that celebrates the pioneers who invented the internet's early backbones, the renegades who lit the fiber revolution, the antics that caused the biggest market crash of all time, and the new wave of entrepreneurs who led the industry back from its ashes. Though it seemed to happen in the blink of an eye, the Bandwidth adventure was a multi-decade roller coaster ride involving larger-than-life successes and devastating failures. The unbridled ambition of newly minted billionaires and high-profile tycoons created extraordinary value, unprecedented value destruction, and endless opportunities for a brave few. This reflects tech's past, present, and future, and is a story you won't soon forget. It will help you prosper during today's AI tech bubble. The book is available at dan-caruso.com/bandwidthbook and released in early 2025.
So let's skip from back then to everything else and go to the here and the now.
Okay.
So tell us about your life now and from a professional standpoint, as you look forward, think about the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. What's your life all about now? What on a professional level, are you, what does success look like? What does a great outcome look like for you over the next handfuls of years? What type of projects are you engaged in? What are you really looking to accomplish at this phase of life? And then we're going to get through all the fun stuff.
Okay. So, and I'm sure that when we go through the fun stuff, it'll give the right amount of context, but I spent a decent amount of my life in which my success matrix looked like money, power, and excitement, autonomy. But I spent a long time in that place. And there was this thing that started out super small because I was 24 years old running the biggest poker games in the world, making millions of dollars in cash. And so I'm all for fun. Life doesn't always have to be so incredibly serious. Like there's this passage from Aldous Huxley's book, and it talks about just going lightly, And so, but then as I scaled the games and as they became not just recreational, but really a war of billions of dollars and everything, I started to feel that things weren't right because I wasn't doing anything with any purpose. Mm-hmm. And I came to realize I could make all the money in the world. I could, there could be a movie made about my life by, the top screenwriter in the world. But if what I do doesn't have some sort of purpose that resonates heavily with me, it's just not going to be the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so, I am values first because I tried it a different way and the outcome was not great. And also when I put values first to the best of, give it my best shot, I totally believe that I can do anything in the world. I have this inner belief in myself. And I also believe that good things, I deserve good things. I don't have imposter syndrome. I don't, I'm like, look, I'm out there. I'm trying to, follow this moral compass, no matter what is on the other side of that. And that makes me feel incredibly powerful. Mm-hmm. And so what I realized is, after the movie came out, I got all these opportunities and second chances, but I also realized that I wanted a baby and I wanted a family. And it was pretty late in the game and it was a hard road. And Fiona is 3 years old now. And her entire life, I have documents and notebooks of this next business I'm going to start and, and this next idea I have, and okay, let's start putting the pieces together. And then I would always run up against this wall. And I finally realized why is that, if I'm truly going to be values first, my value is to be with her as much as possible until she goes to school and to be part of shaping those first 3 years. So I have a great opportunity where I can write, I can consult, and I can, travel, give a speech, and come home. And as much as I'm dying, chomping at the bit, reading everything about AI, wanting to help build community for moms, all this stuff, I know what it takes to start something. And I know that can't be right now. And that has taken an incredible amount of work on myself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, your kids are only at that stage once, and you're bouncing around all over the place doing a bunch of different things that, it's a big trade-off.
Yeah.
I look back and try to reflect on my life, and, I tried as best I can to balance, but,
well, sometimes you can't, right?
You can't. Yeah.
So, that's the thing is most people can't. They have to support, I have to support my family. Financially and everything, but I can do this thing that I'm gone a couple times a month and make enough money to support my family. We're not living at the top of the mountain, and our house isn't built around a rock. But
is that Jeremy's?
Yeah. Yeah, his house is pretty epic. Not epic like this, but I can do that. And that can be enough. And then I can spend the rest of my time with Fiona. Mm-hmm. But that was a majorly, there was almost a grief process that went along with that. And I felt trapped and suffocated and had to do a lot of work on it. But, not most people don't have that opportunity to make money, check that box and then be able to spend 60% of the time, 70% of the time with your child. So that's where I'm at right now. And so they call me the Apache because there are helicopter moms and then there's you. But I'm not like a helicopter mom in that, I'm no, don't climb that. I'm just so focused on okay, I've been reading all the books. I've got an Excel spreadsheet here. You know what I mean? And then, but it's Excel spreadsheets of games and activities and treasure hunts. But yeah, I'm just very myopic. I'm very much, if I'm in something, I'm in it. Mm-hmm. But I'm really looking forward to starting something and to building something that I think will ultimately be the legacy that I leave here.
Good. So Molly's Game, that wasn't easy for you to get published, was it?
It wasn't easy for me to get published, and it certainly wasn't easy to get made into a movie.
Yeah. So take us through when you wrote the book.
Okay.
You must have known you had a story that was worth telling and worth people reading, yet you still have to convince others.
I thought that's about all I had, which it kind of was. I was 35 years. I had just been sentenced in federal court, and everybody thought I was going to prison. So thank God I didn't. Mm. But, I'm at dinner with the family after, and Jeremy's getting inducted into the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame. Jordan just graduated from Harvard for the 90th time. And I'm sitting here I'm the family felon. I live with my mom. I'm 35 years old, millions of dollars in debt. For life, unless I get a pardon, I'm going to have a felony. So that limits a lot of what I can do to try to pay down this incredible debt. And, it took a second for me to think of what can address financial ruin, reputational ruin, because the tabloids were telling the most reductive tale and they weren't doing me any favors. And, a network that's been essentially decimated. And, so what is it? And then slowly I came to it. Okay, there's a story here. And I was a voracious reader when I was younger. And by younger, I mean before I had Fiona. And I've always loved storytelling. And I think storytelling can be a powerful delivery system. So it was a great way to, kind of get my version of the narrative out there. The problem is all the publishers wanted a really big celebrity takedown piece. Yep. And they were willing to pay a lot of money for it. But, I was really committed to the comeback being full of integrity and accountability. So, when I was so miserable after the feds seized all my assets, they just took all my money, and I was so mad that nobody called me after. And then finally, I just got to this point where I had to say, Molly, this is your fault, 100% your fault. You had great attorneys that gave you near perfect information on the laws. You have great supportive parents, an education, a resume, and this is what you did. So own it. And so from there, that's what prompted when the prosecutors wanted me to become a confidential informant and, sort of give them little leads to the billionaires and the finance and the celebrities and Hollywood people. They offered a sweet deal, all your money back. We're going to keep you out of prison. But, I knew it's those moments where you either are or you aren't who you say you are. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that I had to stand for what I did. And then, second comes the book, right? We'll give you 7 figures. We'll put lots of marketing money, dollars behind it. No, there's a better story. Young girl from Loveland, Colorado, pass, and finally I got this small, insignificant, advance and book deal and published my book and waited for my life to change. And then I think 10 people bought it and maybe all of them related to me. But
was the original name of the book Molly's Game? Uh-huh. How'd you come up with that being the name of the book? I mean, it's a perfect name, but perfect names don't pop up, immediately.
First of all, I hate trying to name things. I'm the worst. It's just that's what everyone called my game.
Okay.
So it was Molly's Game. You're going to Molly's Game, Molly's Game. Even checks from, my business account were as good as cash on the street. It was just, it was a brand. But then I got even more determined because as I had written the story, I believed that there was a lot in there, opportunities for me to say sorry publicly to certain people, opportunities to tell a story about a woman who made a mistake and is flawed, but, is not going to give up. And then also, again, I didn't have any other ideas. So I started going, making meetings in Hollywood, mm-hmm. That life, and everybody wanted a meeting. And I would go and I would give it my all. And people who have the shortest attention spans in the world would sit there for the whole thing. So I knew that it was a good story, but then I would never hear from them. So finally I got real with somebody and I said, just tell me on background. I will not betray you. What's up with this? And he said, there's a group of people that are very powerful in both DC, New York, and Los Angeles that are calling the studios and the big producers and saying, do me a favor, don't make the Molly Bloom project. So even though I had fallen on the sword, even though I had, not written this salacious, celebrity takedown piece, they still didn't want the movie made because they didn't want any risk of exposure. Mm-hmm. And this time I said, this is my life. I deserve a second chance too. So I made a short list of the most successful, I ran the numbers, filmmakers in Hollywood. It was it was a crazy list. It was Steven Spielberg and Shonda Rhimes and, Catherine Bigelow and Aaron Sorkin, the greats. And also part of the edit process in creating that list they needed to be people that if they believed in a story enough, they couldn't be deterred by, somebody.
Pressure.
Right. And I just felt like Aaron fit that bill so well. And he was is my favorite writer. And so I just started trying to get a meeting with him and most people literally laughed at me, but I was persistent. I mean, I'd lost everything. I was living with my mom, I was like, you think you laughing at me is going to hurt my feelings? Can you get me the meeting or not? And so I finally got the meeting with Aaron And
so tell us, I know the answer to this quiz, but tell us who Aaron is. Like, why is he a big deal?
Okay. So Aaron Sorkin was at the time, and I think still is, the highest paid screenwriter in the world. He wrote A Few Good Men. That was his first movie. He wrote it on Cocktail.
That was his first movie. Wow.
He was working
Talk about getting out with a bang.
Right. He was working as a bartender at the Lincoln Center or somewhere on Broadway. And he started writing this idea he had for a movie on cocktail napkins. And that was A Few Good Men. And then he went on to do The West Wing, one of the most beloved shows ever, and Newsroom and The Social Network.
Yeah.
And Steve Jobs. And he was kind of the GOAT. He was the one to get. If he signed on to your project, nobody was going to not take it seriously. And, so he wanted to meet at the Soho House, and I really hated going in places like that at that point, because it was like a bad soap opera. Like, I would walk past the tables and people would like whisper, I mean, it was in the news. Like,
did you feel like people recognized you at that point?
Well, it was a lot of people that I knew.
Okay. So
I don't think it was like so much facial recognition. It was just that I knew that scene. I knew those people.
Yes.
And it was a whole entertainment scene. So they knew. And I just remember feeling like, am I out of my mind? My book sold 10 copies. I live in my mom's basement. What was I thinking chasing down Aaron Sorkin? And the only reason he's at this meeting is because a friend of mine is a friend of his and asked for a personal favor and had sent him like the Vanity Fair article. But he didn't want to. He had no interest up front because he was reading the tabloid version of it. So, I had some practice in being afraid, but doing it anyway. So I walked into the meeting and I told Aaron my story, and he stood there. He sat there listening, and he's got a great poker face. And when I was done, there's like this moment. And then he said, like deadpan, straight faced, well, I've never met someone so down in their luck and so full of themselves. And I was just like, oh my God. And then I think,
why do you think you're full of yourself?
That was his way of saying, you really messed it up really bad, but you're walking in here like you're, like you're owning the
story.
Like you're on top of the world, right? And I think part of that he came to understand. So in the movie, most of the movie is dead correct. We all sound smarter and funnier than we are because it's Sorkin dialogue, and but the events are very accurate, and that's pretty unusual for a Hollywood movie. But the one place he did take creative license is in the courtroom scene, in the arraignment scene, when Idris Elba, who plays my attorney Jim Walden, and the character Jessica Chastain keeps Idris keeps wanting to ask her a question and then go back, and it's it's just like it's Sorkin comedy, but essentially what's happening there is he's asking her these questions that lead him to believe this is a different story than he had originally imagined. And those questions were like, don't you have so much money on the street? Can't you sell that debt to somebody? Of course. Yeah. Why don't you? Well, I can't be sure that people won't get harmed, and none of these things seem that noble to me. They just seem like the right thing to do. Or what about, just like these different questions that started to help him see that this wasn't a movie about, a girl that was like filling drinks at a poker game, like it or hate it. There was
It's an entrepreneur. It was a powerful person. They happened to be a woman.
24 years old.
Seeing an opportunity at a young age and going with the flow. Let's tell the story, because I'm sure the people listening to this are like, okay, I remember some of the story. Mm-hmm. Maybe they saw the movie, maybe they didn't.
Sure.
So let's get into the story.
Okay.
So
you want me to do just a 5-minute summary?
We'll go deeper into that. Let's go a little deeper into that if you're comfortable with it.
I'm going to let you lead this.
Let's really get this.
Okay.
So you keep talking about 24 years old. So what were you doing when you were 22 and 23? So what led to?
I was skiing competitively. So we would take the spring semester off to go compete when we were at Boulder. And the reference there is because CU Boulder's just over the horizon from where we're sitting. Yes. Thanks for giving that context. We're not geolocated on this. So I would go to school during fall semester, take off spring semester, and train and compete, and then do a really quick Maymester, squeeze as much as I could into it, and then go find winter somewhere else, whether that's Southern Hemisphere or the glacier in British Columbia that doesn't exist anymore. So I wasn't on the in and out of college in the 3 or 4 year So then at the Olympic qualifiers, I trip on a stick, literally. I ski over a stick. My binding pre-releases. I get hurt pretty bad. I mean, I can still walk away, but it would have been some like a year of PT and who knows. And I just had so much metal in my back. And like the surgeon that looked at the x-rays after my fall just said to me, you're playing a dangerous game here.
Yeah. You don't want to be paralyzed for the rest of your life.
Right. And so I just kind of knew it was over, but I didn't know who I was without this identity of being a competitive athlete. And so I had one more semester at Boulder, and I just kept like dropping class. I mean, I had, like a 3.995, but I couldn't focus. I was beat up emotionally. So I decided my solution was that I would go take a year off and, just try to find myself, try to figure out who I was. And I didn't really know.
Had you thought when you were skiing, about when I'm done skiing, here's what I'm going to do with my life?
Yeah.
So you're thinking you were going to go to law school.
Yeah. I wanted to do civil rights law or, eventually get into lobbying or, I wanted that kind of impact. And I'd even been studying for the LSATs and I did well, even though Aaron inflated my score by a lot. So now people are like, how did you do that well on the LSATs? And I'm like, well, I did well, but I didn't do that well. So I just decided that, and I wanted to go somewhere warm. And I, my parents were like, we're not paying for this. As long as you're in school, we'll pay for it. But if you're messing around. So I had to kind of go somewhere where I could get on a couple tanks of gas. And I ended up in LA. When you're young, you don't know things. And if I would have known what I know now, I would have said, vulnerable, reeling, have something to prove, trying to find herself. LA is not the place, sister, but I got there and all of a sudden the sun shone every day and, your life could change in an instant. And it was very exciting. And I started working for this company. And one of the days, one of the partners came in and said, I need you to serve drinks at my poker game tomorrow night. And I didn't even know what poker was. And, I remember trying to do a little research. I mean, I've been like dreaming about AI and ChatGPT, like things that can like having my own research assistant since the beginning of time. Cause I'm like, I need all the information. So I remember Googling things like what kind of music do poker players like to listen to? And I made this incredibly embarrassing playlist with songs like The Gambler on it. And, showed up and just popped that baby on. And, all of a sudden, Tobey Maguire and Leo DiCaprio and Ben Affleck walk in the room. And, just to let you know, like if people have talked about playing in these games, if it's been in the public medium, fair game. I'm not going to tell any stories that are going to ruin lives. But if they've said they played in the game, then I have no problem mentioning their names. There's other people that haven't been exposed, and that's their story to tell. So, but then, also at some of these games, the head of one of the biggest investment banks in the world, politicians who were household names, professional athletes who were larger than life, people from the tech world, the art world. I mean, it was this, I got to be a fly on the wall and have this access to information and capital and this network. And then also when people are paying in chips, it's a good economy to be dealing with. Like the chip economy is like pretty lucrative. But for those first 6 to 8 months, I was the cocktail waitress. And then, I started to forge alliances and make notes constantly on if I did this, how I would do it differently. And I think because I didn't know what poker was, I was able to have a broader view of what was happening. And it was really so much about.
What game would they play? Would it be Texas Hold'em or would it be?
At this point, they're playing Hold'em. Buy-in was 10,000. I think blinds were 25-50. There were big results to me who had never seen anything like this. And they are big results now, but it gets much, much bigger. Anyway, so and you've got, comedians and I mean it's amazing. But, as I'm watching this thing, I'm like, this is about community, this is about the mythology. I mean, you'd have one game on Tuesday and they'd be talking about it until the next Tuesday,
Well, I used to host big games myself, and I'm going to do it again maybe this year. It's barely a month goes by when I don't run into someone says, hey, when are you going to have your games again? But I would host Texas Hold'em tournaments once a year, but they're pretty elaborate. There'd be typically 60 to 80 players.
Wow.
And, would 20% we'd sweep for charity. I'd pay for everything, so there was no profit motive. But I wanted there to be big winnings because I wanted the person who won to be like, man, I made $8,000 or made $10,000
right.
In the night, and people just would talk about it and talk about it.
Believe the amount of talking? And so later on, after I started my own games, what I figured out a couple things about that. First of all, there seemed to be this social status hierarchy. So. Sorry, the billionaires were at the bottom.
Yeah.
Not for me. I was much more interested in people that were talking about business and everything. But the celebrities were in the middle and the athletes were gods. I mean,
that's funny because as you know, I'm have a home in El Dorado, which is one of the original Discovery Land properties.
Yeah.
And if you've got a property there, you're certainly worth money. But that same hierarchy exists. If you're there because you made a lot of money in business, okay, that's interesting, but you're at the bottom of the rung, and then you work your way up where it's celebrities and it's athletes. It's the same thing.
It is, and it's so interesting. I mean, I observed when a big athlete would walk in to that room, it would be like being at a Taylor Swift concert. Only the players were 13-year-old girls. I mean, they would fold top hands to these people.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Why would they do that?
I would have loved to sat down and figured out the logic. Did they think that they were going to
make them more friends with them, or they'd come back to the game later?
And you know what? It kind of did.
Yeah.
But then
I guess back then the top athletes weren't making the kind of money that top athletes make nowadays.
Yeah, they don't have all these different rev streams, and I mean like Michael Jordan was, but now everyone has their own company, their own merch, their own whatever.
Yeah, and they're just straight up compensation on their teams.
For sure.
Top athlete is gigantic now.
Yeah, for sure. So and then
even if you're a college football player,
right. Poor Jeremy missed out on that boat. So if it was getting a little bit harder to recruit or there was some buzz dying down, I would pay for an athlete to play, because then for the rest of your life, that's the game that this legend played in.
Yep.
And then I also realized that if you stack the table, the 9 seats with players of similar playing styles, and then similar skill level, you have these big outcomes. But at the end of the year, if they're all playing together, mostly you have a flat, you have the like pretty flat like profit, and the house makes money.
Yeah.
So that was something really important I learned. But
and how would the house make money in those games? Would you sweep a certain amount off the top, or? So
it was basic supply and demand.
Yeah.
So early on, the person whose game it was said, if you want to come back next week, tip Molly. And then then when I took over, when I started my own games and raised the stakes to 50,000, and also at that point started flirting with it, then doing it in an official capacity, I was essentially loaning people money because they're not bringing $50,000 or $500,000, of ammo. So I had to make these financial decisions on how much I'm going to loan, especially when I started guaranteeing the game. And then if the game gets settled and somebody doesn't pay, I paid. So you can imagine the tips got bigger and bigger because A, people wanted the real estate, and B, they didn't want any problems with, if they were down $5 million, getting another.
What's the biggest amount that you had to be the bank for? How big did that get at times?
So it was a combination. I became really good at vetting people because I got burned a couple times. And in LA, people will drive the brand new Lamborghini that they've been leasing, but they'll live in the valley in a 1-bedroom apartment. Like liquidity is a whole different deal. So I made some friends at some banks, and I'd be able to assess somebody's real financial picture. And then, for the first couple times I would have them post. If I didn't have a lot of trust for them, I would have them post for more, or somebody at the table would have to vouch for them. But what really kept me safe, as long as I did that sort of back end homework, what really kept me safe was if you stiffed this game, that was reputational suicide. People would, in the business community, in the movie, they would say, oh, well, so-and-so is broke. And that's, and then also there wasn't another game like it. There wasn't another game where somebody was running it as a business instead of playing in it and was able to make objective.
And when you broke away, still in LA, and you broke away from the person you worked with, he brought you over, you started out as a server, and you started organizing those games, but then you broke away and did your own game. Was there friction there? How did that work?
This is a great story. So I started working for him, and I found him to be the most terrifying person I'd ever met in my entire life.
You should have worked for me about 15 years ago.
Really? Oh, I can't imagine. I mean, I can imagine you being, a taskmaster. This was like swimming with sharks. Okay. And so I was terrified of him. And I
guess wrestling with a bear doesn't sound as bad as swimming with a shark. So
right. I think I don't know which one I'd choose. Neither. Thank you.
Okay.
But he had taken me under his wing in this weird mentorship way. So I was terrified of him, but he also was trying to teach me about the world. And I just kept saying to him, what I'm learning from you is who I don't want to be. I think you have a bad soul. And he would say, which he doesn't. He's like everyone else. He's, but he would say, you grew up in Loveland, Colorado, and you think that kindness and, volunteering at Cedar Sinai with the sick kids is going to get you what you want. And I'm telling you right now, the world's going to eat you alive. And so I was working for him. I was working like up to 80 hours, and he took my salary away because I was getting tipped so much at the games. Now I was getting tipped so much at the games at that point because I was going above and beyond for people, getting them reservations at restaurants, like buying presents for, I turned myself into a full-time therapist concierge. Okay. And for various reasons. And so he said, you're making $4,000 a night at the game. You're going to work for me for free as many hours as I want. And that's how you get paid. And I hated that, but I accepted it. I'm pretty loyal. And, I felt thankful that I was having this opportunity. But then he got really stressed out, and he's, turned to me and said, you're allocating way too much of your time to this game when what you should be doing is helping me in the office. I'm going to give this game to this girl, Lisa, give her all the contacts. By this time I had recruited a ton of players, and, I'd put a lot of my own sort of creativity and into it. And I said, over my dead body, but I was scared.
Yeah.
I was scared to go up against one of the boys of the Billionaire Boys Club. And, they were like, they had this whole, kind of no girls allowed thing. But I knew I needed to take a shot. So over the 8 months that I had been working as a cocktail waitress at the game, I had been designing this game, this experience that I would create if and when I
ever had the opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So the first time you organized your own game, how'd you do that? How did you contact people and invite them and communicate to them that this is a little different than other ones because this is going to be your game, not the game that you were otherwise associated with? That must have been just terrifying, I imagine.
So I was the person, I made sure that I was the person that invited them every week, that collected money from them. So I went to their house, got to know them, got to talk to them. They would want to talk about the poker hands for about 8,000 hours. Paid them. Like I had.
Did I tell you about that poker hand I had once at one of my tournaments? I'll get to that later.
Okay. I want to hear.
It was crazy.
Was it?
Straight flush to king, and everyone stayed in, took everyone's money. I'll tell you that story someday.
All right.
It's exciting to me and boring as hell to you. But
no, it's not boring to me. I actually miss poker hand talk now. If you want to know the truth. So I moved the game from this dingy bar basement to I spent almost every cent that I had made up until this point, to the penthouse suite at the Four Seasons. I outfitted the room with fresh flowers. I tweaked the lighting. I made sure the air was perfect. I hired a full staff of people and had them memorize everyone's favorite food order, drink order. So all they had to do, everything, all their favorites was just at the table.
Now that you're talking about this, I remember this part of the movie.
Yeah. I had a better playlist. I made sure the
Gambler wasn't on this playlist.
No.
You were past that point.
Although they ended up really liking it and wanting it, but I needed a vibe for this, right? So it was Frank Sinatra and and everything about it was elevated, and the stakes were higher, so that had people's blood flowing. I made sure that the 9 seats were 9 of the most compelling people, and I did it on a week where my boss was out of town. So I didn't say much other than location has changed, and I did that at the very last minute, so people weren't texting him, and everyone showed up. And when human beings have an experience that feels good to all of their senses and is exciting and novel and makes them feel special. And, also I think every person that plays poker would like to feel like they're in James Bond and Monte Carlo, So I just built on the fantasy of it. And, anything they wanted, I would tell my staff, unless it's demoralizing or illegal, the answer is we'll figure it out. We're the highest and hospitality that you could possibly have. And so they all decided to make it their home game. And I think I didn't know much about running a business or keeping accounts. Like I could barely fumble through Excel, but then I got really good at Excel. My friends made me I remember when I turned 30, they made me a Excel spreadsheet birthday cake. Oh, yeah. That's how immersed in Excel I became. And, they showed up because I had shown up for them in a really authentic way. And I think they trusted me more so than.
And what was the legality details of what you were doing at that point? What was considered legal, illegal?
Yeah.
Where was it a gray area?
So, first of all, there was a big question whether or not poker belonged anywhere in the federal statute at all. And both in LA and New York, the cases that had been brought, the precedent had been set that it didn't, because the language is running games of chance. And it's a pretty easy argument to make that poker is a game of skill.
Yeah.
You're not rolling a dice. Well, some people were going all in blind. I mean, anyway, so.
Randy, that's you she's talking about. Randy, you know who you are. Who won the tournaments going in blind?
Oh my gosh, isn't that so annoying? But fun. So, so from there, I said, okay, but let's just say if somebody did prove that poker's in this federal charge, how do I avoid that? Well, it's profiting, and then it listed the ways to profit. And so if I took a rake, which means a percentage of each pot, which is what they do in Vegas, which is what they do in every single for-profit game in Los Angeles or New York, then that would be a violation. But if it was just based on tips and I had an event planning company and I took out, that there was costs incurred for the room, the food. So I'm coming out of pocket for nothing, right? I have no overhead. And that's legal. And then the winners tip. And, people started winning 6-7 figures. And then in New York, someone lost, $100 million in one night. And so I'm getting, I'm making $4 to $6 million a year, paying my taxes, not messing around with write-offs or loopholes. And, that was how I did it. And then when I got to New York.
So when you got to New York, why'd you leave LA? Why'd you go to New York?
So there was a player in the LA game that had been there from the start and really did, and had always had a hand in, wanted to have tons of conversations about, okay, so what do you think about the game? And he was arguably the best player and wanted to keep it that way. And he got away with playing tight and, playing actual poker as opposed to what other ever game that these guys were playing. And then, he became more and more obsessed and said things like, I don't even care about the money. It's more about crushing souls. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. But he was great for the game. And he was a draw. And then he started to ask me in certain ways for compliance around decisions that would give him an edge. That's
what would be an example?
That's a nice way of saying he wanted me to be complicit in cheating. Staking a pro. So you're both playing at the table with the same money. And you can tell me all day long that you're going to play the same, but you're not. And also no one else wants to play with the pro. So, just these sort of, these things.
So you'd have someone else at the table that, you guys are feeding off each other.
Yeah.
Trying to kind of lead other people to come in on pots.
Yeah. And this isn't somebody that, this person would ever be friends with. This was purely, he had a piece of him. So meaning when the pro wins money, which they're going to at this table, that goes in this person's pocket. Mm-hmm. Plus, whatever edited way two people play together. Mm-hmm. And so again, you want to tell everybody that you're staking this person and that, you know each other and you're in business together, the business of poker. If you want to transparently tell everyone that, then that's a different conversation. And so as I got, as I shot it down more, it was this whole evolution and sort of culminated with this very strange demand for compliance in a very public and humiliating way, but not not outward. He came over and said if I wanted my tip that I was going to have to get on the table and bark like a seal. And I laughed because I thought it was a joke. But 45 minutes later, when there was like a standoff and he was deadly serious and the poker had stopped playing and everybody was looking at us. And he's like, what, are you too rich now to do this? And I didn't give in.
Good for you.
Good for me. But that also made him, more and more angry. And finally, one day he came to me and he said, you make too much money. Because I was working on tips. And he said, do you know who the biggest winner in the game is? I said, it's you. He said, do you know who the second biggest winner is? I said, it's the house. He said, if you want to work for me, I'll give you a salary. You can just be kind of a figurehead. But otherwise, I'm gonna figure out a way to get you out. And, I just remember going home and feeling like ice water in my veins because I loved this experience of being an entrepreneur. I loved this experience I was having, not only the money or, the interesting people, but learning. I mean, this was like getting my MBA in everything from people who, from like the most prolific professors. I mean, it was, if you like information and inside baseball, I mean, this was next level. And, I was this 25-year-old kid who was making $5 million a year. And this was before, influencers and YouTubers. And there's probably like some porcupine that makes that much money, has its own YouTube show.
That was .com.
All right, so. Whatever, but this was before all that took place. And also, I was honing a skill, like all these people, these accomplished people, when there would be a problem or something, they'd all look to me to solve it. And I didn't want to lose the game, but there's always been this like thing in me, like just this fight, like you're not gonna take my power. I was a nightmare to parent, but there's pretty much nothing I won't walk away from except for my daughter now. If it means taking away my self-respect. And this is something that I really like want to shout with a megaphone because people think they don't have options, and I lost the game. He called me gleefully, happily 2 weeks later and said, you lost it. You're done. And I was devastated.
And did he continue forward with that game?
So he had convinced this whale to have the game at his huge mansion. And yes, this actor who's also very smart and very strategic and very manipulative had done the seed planting and just moved everyone over there. And the players called me and they're like, this sucks, but at the end of the day, there's no loyalty in the underground high stakes, gambling world. There just isn't. And that's an adult thing to understand. So, it had been 4 years. I had made a lot of money. I had incredible skills. I had multiple offers and ideas on how to parlay this into something, bigger. My parents really wanted me to go back to school. But I had something to prove, kind of like to that surgeon, like I'm going to make you wrong or I'm going to like die trying, And I was humiliated because the game was known and So I decided that I was going to build the biggest poker game in the world in New York City. Because I heard there's big games on Wall Street and that Wall Street likes to gamble. And it barely occurred to me that it was 2008, or at least I didn't let it occur to me, or that I didn't know anybody in New York, or that the same game runners had sort of been running the same games forever and they're a little scary.
Yep.
I just started formulating a plan. And what I focused on was, I knew the people that were running the games. I knew the way that they were running their games. And I reasoned, if I can bring in the celebrity factor, this crew of beautiful, smart people that,
create the atmosphere, the ambiance.
And I can guarantee the game and it's consistent and there's no rake. I don't see how that doesn't disrupt this, because the other games, like if the game runner was down, they'd let pros in, they would raise the rakes, there's no consistency because the person running the game was a gambler themselves. So then I just started recruiting and networking. And
you probably had a lot of people you could call on right away from your experiences in LA and relationships.
I did. And I had a reputation and a brand. And it was one of intrigue, which is what we wanted, right? But then I also got even more creative, and because, you want to get people on the ground, right? So there are these socialites that go out all the time, every night. You want to make a little extra money? Bring me leads. Casino hosts, the maitre d's at the fine restaurants who have been there for 30 years and know everyone. The concierge at the high-end hotels, same deal. I think all the same people work at all the same hotels. Like when I go back now, they're like, Molly, and so it, and then I unearthed this like huge game where they were playing 5-card stud no limit, 5-7 card stud no limit, PLO, and
what's PLO?
Pot limit Omaha.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And like it was huge. It was enormous. And again, it was 2008, but I remember one of my first games was at one of the, fancy hotels, and the TV was on, but it was muted. And it was the president giving the State of the Union on the economy. And there was $20 million on the table, and I'm just like, I would never take a picture of anything. I never let anyone, but I was like, this is a picture. And so
there was $20 million on the table.
In buy-ins. I mean, this was a $250,000 buy-in, but they would lose it in the first 2 minutes. Like the first hand, if it's 5-card stud no limit, 7-star, you're betting on every street. Like anyway, so it was this big triumph. I didn't, from the time I was little, I didn't like unjust exercise of power. And I can't fix the entire world, but I've always felt like I can, at least try to fix that in my world. And so, I wanted the win. And then I went a little crazy and started building the lower stakes and the mid stakes and because it was so popular and everybody wanted in on this like new, like all the girls lived with me, downtown. We would just travel in this big crew. And there was never anything untoward. Like I always said to the women that worked for me, do not, like, first of all, don't feel like you have to or should, but actually don't hook up with these guys. Look at this as a business opportunity. Like if you want to learn about the business, they're smart enough not to, but, so it was a very it felt like very professional. It didn't feel sleazy or like,
Probably felt glamorous.
It felt glamorous.
Probably was glamorous.
It was glamorous. Yeah. And, you know, it's all about the details always and just doing things with integrity and having people's back. And anyway, it got huge. It got out of control and someone lost $100 million in one night. And
wow.
I didn't guarantee.
Could they afford to lose $100 million?
They could, but can anyone, you know what I mean? It's just like such an outlandish number, and went on to lose $1 billion that year. And of course, like I had such a hard time convincing these guys to let this guy play. And then he plays and loses $100 million. And then like 2 weeks later, I get in trouble. And I'm just like sitting there crunching the numbers of the tips I would have gotten over $1 billion over whatever. Anyway, so it got huge and I started to change. It probably started to change in New York, really. And, you know, you don't go from wanting to be a civil rights lawyer to running the largest underground gambling syndicate and literally watching people's lives come undone overnight. It is this slow sort of, it's these small little seemingly insignificant choices that you start making either in one direction or the other.
For you, the cumulative effect of that, who were you at the end of this versus who were you at the, well, we kind of know who we were at the beginning, but what effect did it have on you in aggregate?
The effect that it had was I started to place money, myself, power, materialism, like those things became my drugs. And when those things are your gods, you are in a very vulnerable situation to make decisions that aren't aligned with, you know, what you value. And I remember waking up one day and looking in the mirror, like after, you know, a 3-day poker game or something, and just being like, who am I? What do I stand for? What's my plan? You know, and just this chilling realization that for the first time in my life, I have no idea. And I'm just, but I can't leave. I want to. Anyway, so.
And why'd you feel you couldn't leave? You just, because you could have left.
You know what I think it was? I went from making no money and doing like the real struggle, like working 5 jobs and whatever. And then, you know, to making, you know, for that time and for that age, like so much money.
For any time and any age.
I agree. But and I didn't think it was something, and I was the boss. And it's not, I don't even like that word, but like, you know, it was mine. I didn't answer to anybody else. And it was exciting and unconventional. But it was destroying me, but I didn't think I could recreate it. I thought, you got this one opportunity, you jumped on it, and this kind of opportunity isn't going to come around again. And what I know now is that you can create that opportunity over and over and over again. But I didn't believe that to be true.
Well, I probably would have a different point of view there.
Well, I don't mean that exact opportunity.
But just in general, I mean, it's hard to create something of significance. You know, I was fortunate enough to be part of multiple things of significance and creating some of them myself. But, you know, if I had to do it again, you know, I would go and realize 2 things. One, it's going to be an incredible amount of work. And 2, it's much more likely to be not successful than successful. It's just what you created. Once you let go of that, you don't know if you're going to get that again. I mean, I feel lucky that, you know, I sold Zale, left Zale, and was worried I would feel compelled to want to do something again, you know, for whatever, you know, the lack of kind of being the boss, having the power, kind of trying to shoot for really big things. Like, you know, you got to let that go. And, you know, I'm glad I was able to, but I know a lot of people in my position, they sort of let it go, but then they jump in one more time. And, you know, and sometimes it ends up well, but most time that last bite at it doesn't work out so well, and you find yourself wondering why you ever tried to do it again. So it is hard to recreate that, and it's hard to let go when you have something like that.
It is, but your situation is a little different because like you invented something that changed an entire industry, and then you sold out.
Thank you. I think that's a little bit beyond what I would give myself credit for, but I like hearing that.
Or you revolutionized it. Okay. Yeah. And when you exited, you had enough money that you didn't ever have to work again if you needed to, right? Mm-hmm. It wasn't that I wanted the power over people or like, or I even needed to be like, oh, she runs that. What I wanted is to not have to have people have power over me, mm-hmm. to be able to live my life financially on my own terms, and to do something that I didn't hate. And so and to be able to make money. And so if that's the criteria, you just want to be able to not work for someone who's terrible, or you want to be able to work for yourself.
But that's you, Molly, with a clear frame of mind, being able to reflect back, think on a more kind of global basis. But when you're in that moment and you're having a 3-day, poker binge, and and your life is kind of, everything's gone in your head, and you've got this, you've got that. Yeah, it's hard to think clearly.
Yeah,
it's hard to even reconcile why. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? You don't really have the time to reflect in a more objective way like you're able to right now. You're running around bouncing off of walls.
Yeah, no, it's just total chaos. But I do think that I do think that you make a great point, and if somebody had proposed that to me, maybe I would have been like, no. But by the end, I hated it. I was miserable. I hated myself. I hated my life. I didn't have any real friends. I had one or two real friends, but I just didn't think that. I thought it was binary. It was either I was going to be broke again and go have to work in restaurants, or I could stay where I was miserable and at least, I had a nice house and a nice car and I didn't have to answer to anyone.
So I have some good news and I have some bad news. The good news is we get to continue this later if I could talk you into coming back.
Of course.
The bad news is we can't continue right now because you have a hard stop and I have a hard stop. And I just got the flash that we're at our time limit, right? And kind of leaving this at a cliffhanger. What's Molly going to do next?
We can do a part 2 for sure.
Yeah.
I have one more job and then I'm taking the whole summer off. So this will be a lot easier to schedule.
All right. Well, hopefully we can, and we'll
absolutely.
We'll leave the people listening to this wondering, okay, what goes on next?
Because
there's a lot more to the story, but also a lot more to you that we kind of touched on in the beginning, and we kind of learned about as you shared your experiences. But it'll be fun to come back and finish the story and maybe even talk a little bit more about, because we kind of skipped through New York pretty quick, and there's probably more to the New York story that we didn't cover.
Stuff in New York. There's the mob and the feds. And
we didn't quite get to those parts, those little parts.
Just a little.
But thank you so much. This has been fun, and it's been great getting to know you the last few years. And maybe before we completely cut off, Sundance Film Festival coming to Boulder.
I mean,
what do you think of that?
I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be more proud. I want to do everything that I can to be a part of it and help make it amazing.
Well, hopefully you're able to make it to the kickoff event that's happening. And I don't know if they're calling it a kickoff event, but the event we're hosting here on behalf of the board of directors of Sundance. It'd be great if you could make it to that. And we'll have a lot of really interesting people here. And hopefully that'll be the beginning of us showing as a community to Sundance that we're really going to make the most out of this opportunity with them, for them, and for, Colorado.
I think it's going to be a great opportunity for both.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.